My brother was secretly negotiating the sale of the family business without telling me. I found out because the contract draft with my name in it arrived to me by mistake. What I did with that information was the hardest thing in our history as siblings and as partners. There are emails that arrive in your inbox, and that before you finish reading them, you already know that what you had before opening them is different from what you have now. Not gradually, instantaneously. Like when an image that seemed to be one thing reveals itself to be something completely different the moment you see it from the right angle. The email arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. It came from a corporate law firm I did not recognize. It was addressed to me, but the subject line said, Draft Share Transfer Agreement Operation Cedar for Rodrigo's review. Rodrigo is my brother. Operation Cedar was not a name I knew, and when I opened the attached file, I found a share purchase agreement for our family company with my name in the transfers section alongside my brother's. Signing a sale I had never agreed to, of a company my father had built over 30 years, that my brother had spent 6 months negotiating to hand over to an investment fund without telling me a single word. My name is Andrea. I am 47 years old. I am the CFO of Grupo Montoya, an industrial supplies distribution company my father founded 32 years ago, and that for the past 8 years my brother Rodrigo and I have managed after my father retired for health reasons. Rodrigo is 44 years old. He is the CEO. I'm a CFO. We have equal stakes of 45% each, and my father retains the remaining 10%. 8 years working together at the same company where we grew up watching our father build something. 8 years of shared decisions, of difficult conversations we had always had face-to-face, or so I thought. The email from the law firm told me there had been at least 6 months of conversations that had not been with me. The first thing I did was read the complete draft, 73 pages. I read them in 2 hours with the concentration of someone reading the most important document they have ever seen in their professional life. The investment fund was called Grupo Inversions Nexo. The transaction was structured as a purchase of 100% of the shares of Grupo Montoya. The purchase price was significant and was in a range I myself would have considered fair, given the company's value. My name appeared in 3 places in the contract as a transferor of my shares, with my complete details, without my signature yet, but with the presumption that my signature was going to arrive. In the background section of the contract, there was a clause stating that both majority shareholders had expressed their willingness to sell at a meeting on the 15th of February. I had not been at any meeting on the 15th of February about any sale. I checked my agenda for the 15th of February. I had been at a CFO conference in another city. Rodrigo knew that. There had been a meeting on the 15th of February that I had not attended and at which apparently a decision had been made that involved me. I did not call Rodrigo that Wednesday. What I did that afternoon was what I had learned to do in 20 years of financial work: build the file before having the conversation. I called our corporate attorney, a woman named Sylvia who has been with the company for 12 years and whom I trust completely. I sent her the draft before calling her. When she answered, she took a moment to speak. She asked me whether Rodrigo knew I had that document. I told her no, that it had arrived by mistake addressed to me. Sylvia told me that what the draft described was a purchase and sale transaction that required the express consent of all shareholders to be valid. That if my name appeared in the contract without my prior knowledge and without my consent, there was a serious legal problem. That depending on how my supposed willingness to sell had been presented to the buyers, there could be additional implications. She told me we needed to do something that same night before Rodrigo knew I had the draft. What Sylvia and I did that night was build the documentation of my absence on the 15th of February, the conference registration where I had been, the confirmation emails of my attendance, the event program with my name on a panelist session, my boarding pass from that day, incontrovertible evidence that I had not been at any meeting in the city that day, evidence that if there had been a meeting on the 15th of February where someone had expressed my willingness to sell, that had occurred without my presence, with the identity of who had represented that willingness still unconfirmed. Thursday morning, I called Rodrigo. I told him I needed to see him at the office before 9. He asked whether there was a problem. I told him yes. I arrived with Sylvia. Rodrigo arrived alone. When he saw me with Sylvia, his expression told me he understood the category of the conversation before I said anything. I placed the draft on the table. What followed was the most difficult conversation of 47 years of being siblings. Not because there was shouting, not because there was unbridled anger, but because what came out in that conversation reorganized 8 years of partnership and 47 of family history in a way neither of us could completely control. Rodrigo did not deny the transaction. He could not deny it with the draft on the table. What he told me was what I did not expect to hear. He told me he had initiated the negotiations because he had spent 2 years wanting to exit the company and had not known how to tell me. That it had not been exclusively about money. That it had been exhaustion. That the company we had inherited from Dad was a project of Dad's that he had continued out of moral obligation and not vocation, and that at some point he had stopped being able to sustain that burden. That when Grupo Inversions Nexo had contacted them, he had seen an exit that resolved something he had not known how to resolve another way. That he had planned to present the transaction to me as practically a done deal to avoid a conversation he knew was going to be difficult. That he had not fully grasped what it meant to include my name in the contract without talking to me first. I asked him what had happened on the 15th of February. He looked down. He told me there had been a meeting with the fund's representatives and that he had communicated that the two of us were in principle in agreement with the terms. I asked him whether he had said that with knowledge of my position or without it. He told me without it. I told him 3 things. The first, that I understood he was exhausted and wanted to exit, that was legitimate, and that if he had told me 2 years ago, we would have found ways to handle it that did not involve this. The second, that what he had done had serious legal implications that Sylvia was going to explain to him. That he had represented my willingness in a negotiation of this magnitude without having that willingness. That was not just a problem between siblings. The third, that the decision about what to do with the transaction was mine as much as his. That if I wanted to sell, we could sell. That if I did not want to sell, he could not sell without me. That was what the shareholder agreement we had signed said, and that he knew perfectly well. Rodrigo asked me whether I wanted to sell. I told him I did not know yet. That I needed time to process what he had told me and to understand what I wanted independently of what he wanted. That what I did know was that whatever decision we made was going to be with my full participation and not as a presented fact. The weeks that followed were the most intense of my professional life and of my relationship with my brother. Sylvia negotiated with the fund's attorneys a pause in the process, while the internal situation was clarified. The fund, when it understood that one of the majority shareholders had not been informed of the process, suspended negotiations on a precautionary basis. Rodrigo and I had 4 long conversations during that period, not only about the sale, about the 8 years of partnership, about what each of us had carried without saying it, about the things we had assumed about each other without asking, about what Dad meant to each of us and how that had affected the decisions we had made. They were the most honest conversations we have had as adults, and they came from a place I would not have chosen as a starting point. I made the decision about the sale after 6 weeks. I decided to sell, not because Rodrigo asked me to, but because when I processed the question independently of what he wanted the answer, I found was that I was also more ready for a different chapter than I had acknowledged. That the company we had built since Dad's retirement was solid and deserved a buyer who would grow it in a way neither of us was going to be able to do from the place of exhaustion where both of us were. That selling was not betraying Dad. It was honestly recognizing where we were. The transaction closed with my full participation, with terms that Sylvia and I negotiated from scratch because the original draft had been invalidated by the process. With a letter to my father that Rodrigo and I wrote together explaining the decision. My father cried. Then he said that what he had built had served to give his children something to work with. That if we had worked well and were ready for something else that was also fine. That also mattered more than I expected it to matter. What I want you to take from this story has parts for different people. For those who have family businesses with partners who are also family. Exit decisions in a family partnership are among the most difficult because they mix the professional with the emotional and with history in a way that has no clear protocol. But the absence of protocol does not justify the absence of communication. If you want to exit a family partnership, tell your partner before you start negotiating with third parties. Not necessarily because you have a legal obligation to do it in that order, but because the person with whom you have that partnership deserves the direct conversation before the done deal. That conversation can be difficult. It is less difficult than what not having it produces. For those who work in partnerships of any kind, the shareholder agreement exists for situations exactly like this one. If you have a partnership and do not have a shareholder agreement with clear clauses on transfer of stakes and strategic decision-making, the time to have it is before you need it. And for everyone, sometimes the people who do things that harm us do not do it from malice. They do it from exhaustion, from fear of a difficult conversation, from a mistaken conviction that presenting something as a done deal is easier than building it together. Understanding the origin does not justify the harm, but it opens the possibility that what remains afterward is more honest than what existed before. In our case, it was. If this story impacted you, comment. Does your partnership have a shareholder agreement that explicitly covers sale or stake transfer decisions? Like if you believe family businesses should have explicit exit protocols before they become necessary. Subscribe for more real stories. Share with someone who has a family business or a partnership and who might benefit from having that conversation before they have to have it. Practical tip. If you have a partnership with family members or trusted partners, the shareholder agreement should include at least 3 critical clauses: right of first refusal in case of share sale, mutual information obligation in negotiations involving the entirety of the company, and an exit protocol establishing the process when one of the partners wants to cease their participation. Those clauses do not express distrust. They express respect for what you built together.